The night Larissa found out the truth, she was carrying a plate of leftover peach cobbler to the kitchen. She wasn't supposed to be awake. She had told Terrence she had a headache and gone upstairs early, around 9, leaving him and his sister Monique alone in the living room the way she always did when his family visited. She had learned, in 3 years of marriage, that her presence made those conversations shorter, so she gave them space. She was thoughtful like that. She was always thoughtful like that. But she'd forgotten the cobbler on the coffee table, and she didn't want ants in the morning, so she came back down in her socks, quiet without meaning to be. She stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom because she heard her name. Larissa doesn't know anything. That was Monique. She's not going to know anything. She trusts him completely. Terrence's voice, lower. That's the problem. She's going to find out about the money before we're ready. Then we move faster. Mom already talked to the accountant. If the transfer goes through before the end of the month, it's not that simple, Monique. It is that simple. She doesn't have access to that account. You made sure of that. Larissa stood very still on that 3rd step. The plate was cold in her hands. The house was dark except for the lamp in the living room, and she could see the edge of Monique's shadow stretched long across the hallway floor. She didn't move. She barely breathed. What about her parents? Terrence said. Her dad's been asking questions. Then you handle that. You're her husband. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. Men like Gerald believe their son-in-laws. A pause. This is $300,000, Terrence. You don't walk away from $300,000 because you feel bad about your wife. The plate was still in Larissa's hands when she turned around and walked back up the stairs. She had met Terrence 6 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Atlanta. He'd been charming in the way that men who've practiced being charming always are. Attentive, funny. The kind of man who remembered your drink order and asked real questions and made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. She'd been 28, just promoted at work, the happiest she'd been in years, and she'd thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. They got married 2 years later. A small ceremony outside Savannah, her mom crying in the front row, her dad walking her down the grass aisle with his big hand steady under her arm. She had looked at Terrence at the end of that aisle and felt like she'd done something right. She found out about his first lie 6 months into the marriage. Not an affair. Not then. Money. He'd told her they were maxed out on the joint credit card because of home repairs, and she'd believed him, and then she'd seen the statement, and there were no home repair charges. There were restaurant charges, hotel charges, charges in cities he'd told her he hadn't visited. She had confronted him. He had cried. He said he'd been visiting his college roommate, whose wife had just left him, and he hadn't told Larissa because he knew she didn't like the roommate, and he should have been honest, and he was so sorry. He had held her face in his hands and looked at her with those eyes, and she had believed him because she wanted to believe him, and because she was 3 months pregnant and already so tired. She lost the baby at 14 weeks. A quiet, devastating Saturday in November, and Terrence had been there for that, genuinely, she thought. He had held her in the hospital and not let go, and she had poured everything she had left into thinking, this is the man who stayed. People made mistakes. Marriages went through hard things. She had read that somewhere and decided to believe it. Monique had been in their lives since the beginning, but it had gotten worse after the miscarriage. She came around more, started having opinions about the house, about Larissa's job, about when they were going to try again. She had a way of framing things as concern that made Larissa feel ungrateful for noticing the knife inside each question. Their mother Phyllis lived 40 minutes away and operated from a distance but with precision. Phyllis had made it quietly but consistently clear that Larissa was not quite what she'd had in mind for her son. Not mean about it, just pointed. She'd call Terrence on Sunday mornings during the time Larissa and Terrence were supposed to have breakfast together. She'd send links to properties without asking, as though she'd already decided where they should live. She gave Terrence checks for his birthday that she did not mention to Larissa. Larissa had found 2 of them, over the years, in his sock drawer. She'd told herself it was a family dynamic, that she just had to give it time, that Terrence loved her. Standing in the dark at the top of the stairs, she understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she had been wrong about all of it. She set the plate on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed and did not cry. That surprised her. She'd thought, if something like this ever happened, she would fall apart. Instead, she felt very quiet and very cold and very awake. $300,000. Her parents had sold a piece of land her grandfather had left them, a plot outside of Augusta, 12 acres, tied up in family history and old timber. Her dad had talked about that land her whole childhood. They'd sold it last spring, after a developer had made them an offer they couldn't say no to at 72. Her dad had called her the day the deal closed, his voice thick with something complicated, and she had driven to Augusta that weekend, and they had sat on her parents' porch, and she had held his hand. $300,000, divided between her parents and two of her dad's brothers. Her parents' share was somewhere around 120. Not life-changing money, but real money, meaningful money. Terrence knew about it. Of course he knew. She'd told him. She told him everything. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs and thought carefully. Monique had said, "She doesn't have access to that account." You made sure of that. What account? The business account, maybe. Terrence ran a small commercial property consulting firm, and Larissa had always been kept loosely at arm's length from the business finances. He'd told her early on that he kept things separate for tax reasons, and she'd accepted that because she'd had no reason not to. She had her own income, her own savings. She hadn't pushed. She wondered now what exactly she hadn't pushed on. She got up very quietly and went to Terrence's desk in the corner of the room. She knew where he kept things. She had lived in this house for 3 years, and she was a thorough person. She opened the bottom drawer and found the brown accordion folder he used for financial documents, and she took it to the bathroom and locked the door, and sat on the floor and went through every piece of paper inside. It took her an hour. By the time she heard Monique leave, the front door, the car, the sound of tires on the driveway, Larissa had found 3 things she'd never seen before: a business account she wasn't listed on, a line of credit taken out 8 months ago against a property she'd co-signed for, and a transfer authorization form with her forged signature, her own signature, forged, on a form dated 6 weeks ago. She put everything back exactly as she'd found it. She went back to bed. She heard Terrence come upstairs around 11:30, heard him check on her in the dark the way he did when she went to bed early, heard him slide into his side of the bed and fall asleep within minutes. He always slept well. That had charmed her once. She thought it meant he was at peace. She stared at the ceiling until 4 in the morning and made a plan. She did not call her father that week. She wanted to, badly, but she knew if she heard his voice, she would tell him everything, and she couldn't afford that yet. Not until she knew more. Not until she had something she could actually use. What she did instead, she went to work as normal. She came home as normal. She made dinner 3 nights in a row that week, something Terrence always appreciated, and she listened to him talk about his day, and she laughed at the right moments, and she touched his arm when she passed him in the kitchen. She was very good at being normal. She'd had years of practice. On Thursday morning, while Terrence was at the gym, she drove to the county courthouse and pulled the property records for every address tied to Terrence's business. It took 20 minutes and cost her $6. She photographed everything on her phone. On Friday, during her lunch break, she walked into the office of a family law attorney named Genevieve Okafor on Peachtree Street. She'd found her online at 11 the night before and read every review twice. She brought a folder with her, printed copies of the documents from the accordion file, the property records, photographs of the transfer form. Genevieve Okafor was a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the particular calm of someone who had seen everything and remained unshocked by all of it. She went through the folder without expression. Then she looked up at Larissa and said, "When did you first suspect something was wrong?" Larissa thought about it honestly. 2 years ago, she said. "I just didn't want to know." Genevieve nodded like that was a reasonable answer. "Here's what you're looking at," she said. "The forged signature is criminal. That's forgery, potentially fraud. The line of credit against a co-signed property without your knowledge has its own issues. The business account exclusion is murkier, but in Georgia, marital assets are marital assets." She set down the folder. "You have more than I usually see at this stage. Most women come in here with a feeling. You came in with documents. I have access to the filing cabinet," Larissa said. "Good. Don't touch it again. We're going to move carefully." Genevieve leaned forward. "Do you know what they're planning to do with your parents' money specifically?" "Not exactly. But they mentioned a transfer before the end of the month. And they mentioned my dad's been asking questions about something." "Then we don't have a lot of time." Genevieve folded her hands. "I need you to do something that's going to feel very uncomfortable. I need you to keep acting like nothing is wrong. Can you do that?" Larissa looked at her steadily. "I've been doing it for 3 years," she said. The following 2 weeks were the strangest of her life. She moved through her days like she was playing a role she'd memorized, hitting every mark. She made Sunday dinner at Phyllis's house and sat across from Monique and passed the sweet potatoes and smiled. She let Phyllis suggest that she and Terrence take a vacation, somewhere warm. You two need it, and said that sounded lovely. She watched Monique pour wine and thought, you have no idea, it was not entirely unpleasant. That scared her a little. Genevieve worked fast. By the second week, she had contacted a forensic accountant who specialized in marital asset cases. He found, within 4 days, that the business account had received 3 deposits that corresponded in timing to checks Terrence's mother had written him, the same checks Larissa had found in the sock drawer. The money hadn't been hidden separately. It had been run through the business to obscure it. He's been doing this for a while, the accountant said, in a phone call Larissa took sitting in her parked car in a grocery store lot. This isn't recent planning. This is a pattern. She sat with that for a long time after she hung up. She thought about the hotel charges 6 months into the marriage. She thought about the miscarriage. She thought about all the Sunday mornings she'd given up so Phyllis could have her son back for an hour. She thought about how many times she had made herself smaller so that everyone around her could stay comfortable. She cried in the car, in the grocery store lot for about 10 minutes. Then she dried her face and went inside and bought milk and came home. The call from her dad came on a Wednesday evening, and it told her the timeline had moved up. I've been trying to reach Terrence, her dad, Gerald said. Left him 2 messages. He's not calling me back. About what, Dad? There's a man who's been calling me. Says he's from a financial services company Terrence works with, asking some questions about a joint investment. A pause. Baby girl, your name is on some documents I never signed off on. Neither did your mother. She had known this was coming. Still, hearing it from her father, hearing the confusion in his voice, that particular careful quality he got when he didn't want to alarm her. She had to put a hand over her mouth and breathe through her nose for a moment. Dad, she said, I need you to not call that number back, and I need you to call me tomorrow morning. There's something I have to tell you, and I want to do it right. There was a long silence. Larissa, what's going on? I'm handling it, she said. I promise. I need 1 more day. He trusted her. That was the thing about her father. He had always trusted her. Okay, he said. Tomorrow. She got off the phone and texted Genevieve. They've made contact with my father. We need to move now. Genevieve called back in 7 minutes. I've been waiting for you to say that, she said. I've already drafted the filing. We go tomorrow morning. She did not tell Terrence that night. She lay next to him and listened to him sleep and thought about the man she'd believed him to be on that grass aisle outside Savannah. She thought about her dad's face when he'd handed her off. She thought about how she had cried that day because she'd felt so certain. She was not going to let them take her parents' money. She was not going to let Terrence and Monique and Phyllis use her name, her signature, her trust, to do it. In the morning, she got up early. She made coffee. She moved quietly through the kitchen. She took her go-bag, packed 3 nights earlier, placed in the trunk of her car with the casual, unhurried precision of someone who has thought everything through, and she texted her best friend Camille in Decatur. Coming to you today. I'll explain everything. Then she went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table and waited. Terrence came downstairs at 7:15. He stopped when he saw her sitting there. She didn't usually sit in the kitchen in the mornings. She was usually already gone for work, and something moved across his face. Not guilt. Not quite. More like recalibration. You're here, he said. I wanted to have breakfast with you, she said, and she smiled. He relaxed. He poured himself coffee. He sat across from her and talked about a meeting he had that morning, and she listened and nodded, and when he got up to put his mug in the sink, she said very evenly, Terrence. He turned. I need you to know, she said, that I'm not angry. He frowned. About what? She looked at him for a long moment. She had practiced this. She had run through it in her head 100 times. She had thought about what she wanted him to know and how she wanted him to hear it. About the account, she said. The one I'm not on. The transfers. The form with my signature on it. She paused. The calls to my father's financial advisor. The color left his face. She stood up. She picked up her purse and her keys. Genevieve Okafor filed the petition this morning, she said. My dad's already spoken to his bank, and the forensic accountant's report is going to be very thorough. Larissa, I'm not angry, she said again. And the strange thing was, she wasn't. She was clear. She was more clear than she had been in years. I just want you to know that I knew. And I had a plan. And I moved first. She walked out the front door. He came after her, onto the porch, and she heard him call her name twice, and she got in her car and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. The divorce took 8 months. It was not easy. Terrence hired an aggressive attorney, and Monique sent long, manipulative texts that Larissa forwarded to Genevieve and never responded to. Phyllis called Gerald directly twice. Both calls Gerald documented and passed to the legal team. There were days that were grinding and exhausting, and days where Larissa sat at Camille's kitchen table and felt like she was dismantling her entire adult life with a butter knife. But the forensic accountant's findings were devastating and irrefutable. The forged signature on the transfer authorization triggered a fraud investigation that broadened things considerably. What had started as a divorce became something larger, and in the middle of it, Terrence's attorney started pushing hard for a settlement. They settled. The terms were, Genevieve told her, better than most. Her parents' money was never touched. The transfer had been stopped before it cleared, and the man who'd called Gerald turned out to have been operating without proper licensure. Something that added another layer of legal complication for Terrence and Monique that Larissa did not particularly follow, because by then she was already thinking about other things. She moved into an apartment in Midtown in the spring, the third floor, a corner unit, more windows than she'd ever had. She painted the living room a color called morning fog on a Saturday in March with Camille and Camille's sister. And they ordered Thai food and stayed up too late and laughed about things that had nothing to do with any of this. And Larissa stood in the middle of the half-painted room with a roller in her hand and felt, for the first time in a long time, like herself. Her dad came to visit the apartment in April. He walked through every room slowly the way he did with new places, touching the door frames, looking out the windows. When he got to the kitchen, he said, "You did good, baby girl." And his voice was the way it had been on the grass aisle outside Savannah, thick with something she now understood was pride rather than grief. She hugged him for a long time in her new kitchen. She didn't date for almost a year. She wasn't ready, and she knew she wasn't ready. And she had learned, finally, to take that knowledge seriously. When she was ready, she was careful and she was honest. And she did not make herself smaller for anyone. She asked real questions and she paid attention to the answers, and she did not let gratitude for being chosen talk her out of what she actually observed. She met someone eventually. Whether that led somewhere or didn't, she'd figure out. She was 34 years old and clear-eyed, and she had moved first. And that, more than anything else, was what she carried with her. There were nights she still thought about that third step from the bottom of the stairs, the cold plate in her hands, the lamplit shadow stretching across the hall floor. She thought, I could have gone back to bed, and then she thought, but I didn't.